Coming to you from the Terracotta Room at the News Service of Florida / City and State Florida HQ in downtown Tallahassee. Welcome to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest, John Lockwood. He is an attorney who specializes in regulated industries such as gambling and cannabis. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into Potlandia, into all things cannabis with the OG of cannabis law in Florida, my old pal. Stick with us. You want to listen to this one.
It's a little different in the cannabis world because this idea of a regulated cannabis market is very new to everyone that's involved.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by City and State Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. Today I am stoked to have a special guest, the OG of pot law in Florida, John Lockwood. John Lockwood, welcome to the Terracotta Room, live in person. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Dara. I'm very honored to be here. That's a great introduction.
John and I go way back to pre-pot, legal pot program in Florida, and we got to know each other on another of the vice beats of mine, and that is gaming. And maybe we'll get a chance to chat about that later. If not, we'll come back for another episode with John Lockwood. So welcome to the Terracotta Room. We got a lot of territory to cover. I like to call it Potlandia. What do you call it?
I don't know that I have a particular name to it. It's just what I do on a daily basis.
Weed World?
Yeah, that's probably a good way to,
I like Potlandia.
Yeah, I like Potlandia. That
Okay.
works.
You can use that anytime you want.
I'll
You don't even need to pay me a nickel. We have right now 22 licensed medical marijuana treatment centers. That's the name that the operators have. The state is poised to double the size of the industry. You and I were chatting a little bit before we started recording about what some of the inherent problems might be in expanding Florida's market under the framework that we have right now. We have vertical integration. That means the MMTCs. I'm sure our listeners are really sophisticated, and I'm sure they know all this, but let's just go over it anyway. The operators have to grow, process, and retail or dispense products. It's called vertical integration. Very controversial, but it does make it a little bit more difficult. It does increase the cost, right?
Makes it more expensive.
Yeah. So the number of licenses under state law is supposed to increase as the number of patients grows. We're approaching 800,000 patients right now. So the state should have issued another 22 licenses plus one that's earmarked for a black farmer. We'll come back to that in a moment. Tell me, what is the landscape in Florida? How desirable of a market is it right now for investors, and is that going to change?
There's a lot to unwrap from that. The state hasn't issued any cannabis licenses in a number of years. We've got the law that ties it to patient population. So you're right. Today we're at a scenario where there's, I think when I saw the report on Friday, we were around 770,000 patients, approaching 800. That would trigger another 4 licenses in the state. interest in the state of Florida, I think every cannabis company in the country wants to plant a flag in Florida. I mean, it's a very large state. We have a lot of retirees here. For a cannabis operator, it checks a lot of boxes in that regard. The flip side of that is it's a very large state. So it requires a lot of capital for someone to come into the state, get up and operational. It takes a lot of time. And right now we're in a scenario of it's just difficult for these operators to find capital. Everything you're reading about now is it's difficult. Used to, there was a lot of eager people that were looking to move into this industry, and a lot of them did, and a lot of them lost a lot of money. And I think that that's kind of created this stigma that it's difficult for an investor to find their way, within this industry. So I don't know with the 22, 26 licenses that it's a great time for the state, really. I think what they're going to find is the quality of applicants that they have in the state. A lot of the really good operators that are out of state may actually just stay out of this round because, and I've talked to several that have said, look, if I had a license right now, I don't have the money to divert to Florida to build this thing out. I would love to, but I can't find the money. And so I think there's this, a lot of people that aren't very familiar with the industry think that there's all these rich investors out there that are always looking to move money in the state. But the reality is if we have 22 to 26 licenses, that's going to require a minimum of $1.5 to $2 billion of capital to get all of those licensees up and operational. That's a lot of money. And then when you deploy that kind of capital, those operators are going to need to generate a minimum $50 to $100 million a year in revenue just in order to get some kind of decent ROI for what they've expended in the state. And so you have a couple of things there, just the mere fact of there's not enough investment money to go around.
Right.
And then is the market that big that we can, support 46, 48 licenses in the state and then some?
Right. Well, I mean, part of the problem is, or part of the issue is that there's a lot of money being transacted in Potlandia, but there's not necessarily a lot of net profit that's being gained by the operators. True?
That's true. I mean, when you have you hear this 280E that everyone talks about on the federal level, and that basically means that pretty much every dollar that comes in the door for a cannabis dispensary is going to be subject to federal income tax. I mean, you can deduct cost of goods sold, but you're not operating in the same playing field that another type of a retail establishment would be operating at, and so it puts you at a pretty significant advantage. You get in a scenario where the better you do, the more tax you pay.
Well, it puts you at a disadvantage, right?
What did I say?
Advantage.
Sorry, yes. You're at a disadvantage to the other operators,
Yes.
non-cannabis operators, again,
Right.
because you're...
And that requires federal action in order to do something about that. That's not something the state can change. And also we have Governor DeSantis, who recently said he didn't think that the marijuana companies or operators were paying enough for the privilege of doing business in Florida, and he wants to see their licenses increase, maybe the renewals or the licenses. Right now, they are paying they paid $60,000 to apply back in 2017, 2016, 2015.
It's been a long time.
Gosh, yes. And so they paid $60,000, and now their renewal fee is $60,000 every other year. So it's essentially $30,000 a year, which seems like a pretty good deal. The governor thinks they should be paying. I think I quoted him in a story saying it should be in the millions. I'm not sure. John's nodding. I don't think he wants to nibble on that one.
I mean, I think a license fee in the millions is probably excessive.
Right.
At this point in time, certainly, if the issues in the federal level were resolved and these businesses were operating in a more, beneficial regulatory environment, or something that was a little bit easier to navigate, or something that was much less expensive to navigate, then I think that we could justify seeing higher license fees, taxes, things of that nature. But, at this point, there's very few of these operators that are operating in any sort of a profitable fashion. So, money that goes to license fees in the state is just money that's being taken out of their ability to open up stores, their ability to, enhance and improve their existing operations.
And at some points, they also have had trouble keeping up with production.
Absolutely. I mean, we have now, of the 22 that are currently operating in the state of Florida, several of them, well, of course, several of these operators now acquired these licenses back a couple of years ago, but it's usually from the time you obtain the license by award, by acquisition, whatever, it's a minimum of 3 to 4 years before you're have a cultivation and a processing facility and in some meaningful fashion of a retail network. So it's an expensive and a lengthy proposition. So we don't even have the existing operators that we have now in the state. They're not fully built out at this point. We have a lot that have, more recent entrants to the marketplace that are still in the process of opening up dispensaries. So, I think that, I look to some of those operators when I think of what's it going to mean when we have, all these new licenses that are thrown into the state, when we don't even really understand, how well the 22 that we have now are going to be able to support this population.
Right.
So, but, you mentioned, supply. I mean, in the early days, we definitely had issues with, operators being able to supply the patients. We had a lot of complaints and things like that. But I think a lot of that is changing now at this point in time. I mean, we've got, probably almost 500 dispensaries, I guess, in the state of Florida.
There are somewhere between 400 and 500, and we have a lot of patients. We still don't have all that many doctors. I think there's fewer than 3,000 doctors that are certified to order marijuana for their patients. The whole doctors is a whole nother conversation.
That's true.
But let's talk about another thing that just happened not too long ago here in Potlandia. Chris Ferguson, who had been the head of the Office of Medical Marijuana Use for, I think, 3 years, recently exited, and the Department of Health hired Chris Kimball as his replacement. He's a relative newcomer on the Florida scene. He served for 21 years in the Navy and for the last, I believe, 12 years was a JAG. So that means he was a Navy prosecutor. It's created a lot of tension, I think, to put it mildly, in Potlandia as operators and their lawyers and their teams await, to kind of hold their breath to see what kind of approach he's going to take to the Florida market, to the Florida program.
Yeah, so, the cannabis industry is unique because it's very entrepreneurial driven. So, I look at some of the other industries that I've been in and operate in that are, very established, that, a lot of the executives that have been involved in the company founders, they're, really used to how regulation and policy works and things like that. It's a little different in the cannabis world because this idea of a regulated cannabis market is very new to everyone that's involved. And so I think there's a lot of, they get uneasy when we have change in the marketplace like this. And so, we fielded a lot of calls, what does this mean? But in the grand scheme of things, directors, they come and go. We see that across all of these industries. There's always this transitionary process, and, we're now beyond our, I guess, 4th or 5th director, depending. Yeah. So, it happens. I mean, the industry will evolve, and we'll see where this takes us.
Right. I mean, I don't think it's, I wasn't trying to imply that this is necessarily even a game changer, but it is. Any regulated industry where you introduce uncertainty into the
That's right.
mix, it does create a lot of, anxiety.
Absolutely. And for all the reasons we had discussed about, the money. I mean, when you're someone that's, again, you've got to spend $75 million just to start making a dollar, when you're in the middle of that capital expenditure and you're still, your cultivation facility's not quite finalized, expanded, your retail footprint's not out, you've built your business model, and now, well, what
Right.
does this new regulator change? Are we
Right.
going to be forced with, are we going to have new rules, or all the things that we
Right.
relied upon and thought were going to be the case? Is that now going to change? And
Yes.
so, yeah, it's, it definitely creates an uneasy time for a lot of operators.
I've heard about rules dealing with things like signage. I mean, there might be rules about, and I think it's important for listeners to understand that anytime an operator wants to add a product or change a product, even down to the packaging, all of that needs to be approved by the regulators.
Absolutely. It's a very voluminous process for anything that you want to do, and when you talk about the rules, I mean, that's probably a good point, because 381-986, the statutory, framework that regulates this industry, it only touches on certain subjects. So there's so many things when you think about operating a cannabis business on a daily basis that you can't flip to 381-986 and say, there's my answer. And so you have a regulator and the governor's administration that they have to kind of navigate through. How do you want to fill those holes, and how do we want to address those issues? And it's certainly, I think that it, for example, one of the things you'd talked to me about, the Circle K issue, I think that's really a perfect example of, where this state is from a policy perspective.
So what happened there, kids, is that there was a Rise dispensaries announced, or there was a story written that made it sound like they were announcing that they would soon be selling products at Circle K stores. And there was confusion about whether that meant inside Circle K. They were partnering with Circle K, I think was what the gist of it was. I didn't write that story, so I'm not quite sure what the message was, but that created a storm in Potlandia.
I think that's pretty fair. I mean, the concept of a store within a store, or a store, adjacent to another retail establishment, that's not really addressed anywhere in the statutes or the existing rules. And, quite frankly, if I came here and told you that I had a client that was going to partner with a national retail pharmacy chain, and we were going to have cannabis dispensaries in there, I think that would certainly be viewed in a much different light than the concept of selling medical cannabis in a gas station. I don't know that that's where the DeSantis administration is right now, and I think that.
No, they're clearly not, because I did get a statement from them saying that this has never been approved, and they never have made a decision on it. So
Right.
I don't know what their decision will be, but let's just make it. They made it very abundantly clear to me that this is not happening, and they had not agreed to allow it to happen.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's two totally different things, and I think it just sums up the market. Are we more, pharmaceutical, medical, or are we more, convenience store? And I think that, that's probably what we're going to see a lot of out of the new regulator when we move through this, is how do we tackle these, areas that, aren't specifically delineated by, the legislature.
Thanks for listening. We'll be right back with Cannabis OG John Lockwood.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. I've heard one of the owners, and it wasn't Kim Rivers, who we did have on the podcast, so you might want to listen back to that, folks, call Florida's program a veiled recreational program. Do you think that's fair? The idea being that if you have enough cash, if you have enough assets, you can go to a doctor's office and find a doctor to qualify you as a patient. And then you can, if you can afford it, you can go buy your card for $75, and he's making, you can't see this, but he's making a very skeptical look when I say that. Veiled versus true medical program.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the complaints about the medical market, obviously, is that from a patient perspective, is that it adds these additional costs
Right.
on. And, if you've got a couple $100 to go and spend, getting your card, going to the doctor's visit, going to a store, things of that nature, I think a medical program works well. But for a lot of people, that's not really the case. I think that
It's very expensive.
It is, and I think that they're more small denominations at a time, things like that. And a medical program just isn't really set up for that. So I think you still have a lot of those users that are spending $10, $20 at a time on marijuana that are still buying that in a black market. And
Right.
so that's from a regular, it really it's more of a policy decision, is where are we going to go as a state with that? How do we address that? And I know that the constitutional amendment is potentially trying to address
Right.
that, and we'll see. I mean, that's on into the future. I think that a lot of patients, and I got friends, family, things of that nature, when you talk to them, I think that's a lot of their concern, is that to get into the program, I mean, it does cost some money.
Me too. I mean, I have friends who came to Florida from other states, and they're surprised at the expense, that it's about $200 for your first doctor visit. It's $75 for your card. You have to see the doctor every 7 months. So it's not even once a year that you have to pay that. Your renewal for your doctor.
And it's in person for the doctor too.
It is in
we
person.
did experiment with that for a while with renewals and things of that nature and telehealth, and I didn't really hear any problems with that. It seemed to be working okay, but that was something that was kind of done through, I guess, the executive orders, and we don't really have that.
That
anymore.
was during COVID,
That's
and that
right.
was lifted over a year ago.
That's
And
right.
I actually wrote a story about some
Yeah.
doctors were continuing to do telehealth.
I've heard that.
But again, the doctors, whole nother show.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like the Circle K and the dispensaries being inside the stores or adjacent to the stores, I mean, I'm a patient. I don't know if you're a patient, but there are dispensaries in all kinds of strip malls, so they're next door to doctors' offices. Most of the ones that I know of are not standalone buildings. Maybe the one downtown on the corner of Tennessee and Monroe Street. But you know what I'm saying?
That's
is
right.
they're not there's not necessarily anything in the law that says they have to be standalone buildings.
And there's really nothing in the law that says you couldn't do this within another, functional business. I mean, so you just get to a point where, how are you going to contain this from a policy perspective? What do you want this to look like? So, yeah.
So, yeah, if you want it to be, yeah. Anyway, I think one of the other things that's going on right now in Potlandia is a black farmer license. So the legislature required the Department of Health they earmarked one license for a farmer who had participated in what was known as Pigford or INRI black farmer litigation from back in the 80s. I think those lawsuits were dealing with discrimination against black farmers, mostly in the South, by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So we have an announcement that the Department of Health has announced the winner of that, Terry Donnell Gwynn from Suwannee County. That is being challenged. Do you think that the state is going to move ahead with those other licenses while that challenge is playing out, or do you think that they're going to wait? Everybody wants to know, whatever the license is, however much money it might take, the gazillions of dollars to enter the market, there still is a lot of interest in these licenses that have been looming now for several years.
People are going to apply. I still get calls no matter what. So I do think the state probably will move forward. I mean, eventually you get to kind of a tipping point with this where, we've got already one lawsuit that's trying to, compel the agency to move forward, with those licenses.
Right.
I think that, they went through, they scored the process on Pigford. I think they have a pretty good idea of what they want the application to look like. Even if they start now, many months before those applications are going to be submitted, because they'll have a timeline. They'll give everybody an opportunity to come in and prepare their applications and submit them. So I think something like we could see, my guess is we see something from the administration in the next few months on where they're leaning with these licenses. And I could see a scenario where those licenses could be open for submitting and receiving applications sometime in the middle of next summer.
Middle of next summer. That's still quite the while. We had an appellate judge who scolded the health officials for dragging their feet because the delay at one point was blamed on the Flora-grown litigation. The Florida Supreme Court finalized that over a year ago. So why the holdup?
I don't necessarily think a delay is bad. Again, getting back to our discussion, I don't know, can this market support almost 50 licenses in its current fashion? So do
you think the legislature will change that requirement that they add 4 more licenses every time there's another 100,000 patients in the database?
I think they should consider modifying it for sure. I don't know that that's necessarily a good thing. I mean, I think if we were going to have that type of a rolling award program, there would need to be other changes within this, framework that I don't know that they want to make. I think that type of a criteria would be more for a market where it's not necessarily vertical.
Oh, so I was just going to ask you, what changes do you think they would have to make?
I think you would have to make it where it would be, much less expensive on these operators, to come in. But then also how do you do that without being fundamentally unfair to the people that have spent hundreds of $millions in reliance upon a vertical industry and now being told, well, now you don't need that anymore. That's tough. That's
it happens.
I agree, but you also don't want to put these operators in a very difficult financial situation. Again, they're already there. They're providing medicine to these patients. I think everyone has to be cognizant of that. And I think from a regulator perspective, it's good to kind of have your thumb on the pulse there and understanding what's going on in the industry and what the industry really needs to move forward.
So talking about. I was asking you earlier if there was, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that's always going on in Potlandia. I was wondering if there was if you could tell me one of the nuttiest things that you've heard or seen come across your desk or your phone in Florida or in another state.
We see things daily. I get clients that send me videos of things, screenshots from Instagram, things of that nature.
There's a lot of angst about these CBD shops that are advertising which is it? It's the Delta 8, no card needed. They're taking out full page ads.
Exactly. They are playing to their, they have a competitive advantage to the MMTCs. You don't need a doctor. There's no limits to what you can buy.
Right.
There's no, sign restrictions. Their dispensaries aren't regulated in that same fashion, and they've been very creative and they've proliferated. And I think that in some cases it's, it could be a little maybe dangerous in times depending on the operator. I mean, I'm not suggesting that, we've got bad operators all across the board, but, when you have a market like that there's, so much financial incentive there, but so little regulatory oversight.
Yeah.
That's a bad situation to be in. And then when you're competing with a market that, has a substantial amount of regulatory
Highly
oversight,
regulated, yeah.
There's a lot of friction between those two.
Yeah, I get some of these screenshots too from some of the doctors are upset about what's going on in the CBD world.
I do think the industry's maturing a little bit, though. I think some of the silliness that I saw was much more prevalent in 2016, 2017, 2018. You'd see a lot of craziness with investors and things like that, and deals that they would bring for acquisitions and things of that nature. And so a lot of this is starting to evolve a little bit.
Oh, they're little side hustles.
Yeah, there are a lot of side hustles.
I interviewed one of an owner of who came in and bought one of the licenses, and I won't tell you who he is, but this was during COVID, and we were doing a Zoom, and I don't think he was prepared to be on camera with me, but he finally got turned on. It was clear it was just him with his phone on his table, and he had on his sweatshirt saying, "World's dopest dad." And I thought, okay, well, this is good. Welcome to Florida, Potlandia. So any other crazy tales of what's going on? I know there's been a lot of not a lot, but there have been several kind of high profile lawsuits from investors and shareholders. Those are still kind of active. There's a big one with Bo Wrigley and John Morgan. So without getting into the details of that,
Yeah, I mean, I think those things kind of exemplify the struggles of the industry, in financing these type of operations and getting access to that type of capital. You need a lot of capital, but at the same time, you have a lot of tax implications,
right?
On the revenue that you earn, and so it puts a strain on some of those businesses. And so, again, when you're a multi-state operator and you've got multiple jurisdictions where you're building out vertically integrated structures, that's very expensive. There's a lot of things can happen, and at the same time, in the construction industry, there's delays, things of that nature. Nothing ever goes to plan in this industry. So,
right.
I've had very few clients that have been able to, have a timeline for any type of, project that actually, occurred on time and the way that they envisioned that it would occur.
Without any hiccups.
And so, yeah.
So I'll tell everyone right now, I asked Kim Rivers what her favorite product was when she was on. She said she's a flower girl. My favorites, I'm a gummy girl. So do you have a favorite? Can you tell us?
I mean, I'm not really... an edible kind of guy.
Not an edible.
I would say probably, flour or some type of the other concentrates, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you used any of the creams or anything? Well, you're so young. You don't have any aches and pains.
I don't have any
I'm the old lady. I'm the old lady of Potlandia. Anything that we didn't talk about in Weed World that you think we need to address?
I mean, we could be here all day with all the things that are going on in this industry. So I don't know if there's anything that's, that sticks out.
Okay.
I think certainly, talking about the new director and where things are going to go with that. I think, there's just a lot of, interest in the industry to see, what the future holds. Some of these regulations, we got a lot of excitement in this industry. It's just at the same time, it is a challenging industry to navigate. And I think that, that's what, we see from clients on a daily basis, is just understanding, where the policy is going to go in Florida, how some of these business decisions need to be made, because a lot of times when they're making acquisitions and things like that, it really depends on, what the future holds, because this isn't, a lot of time these investments aren't something that you turn the key the next day and it
Right.
starts making money. You've got to be able to see years in advance of where this is going to go. So,
And you also have the issue of the legislature with new leaders, new leadership, and new members. And we don't know, you have a new House Speaker, a new Senate President. To what degree is the industry unsettled by the selection of new leadership and new legislators?
for a lot of our clients, they monitor what's going on legislatively, but they're not terribly active, just because they have so much going on. And a lot of these companies, they just don't have a governmental affairs, department. They do have contract lobbyists and things like that, but, they're drinking from a fire hose constantly. So myself, we've got other, colleagues in the governmental affairs world that talk to, these executives, but
Right.
a lot of them aren't, terribly active
I
and
see.
involved with it. It's more reactionary a lot of times.
Right.
There's just too much going on for them to be able to have an established, this is how we're going to react to this new,
I get it.
legislature.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It's always, there's always a lot of optimism that things are going to change in the regulated environment, but
Well, now Ray Rudd's the head of he's the new chancellor of the state university system, so you don't have to worry about him trying to sneak in THC caps on flour.
I'm sure somebody's going to pick that up and we'll have that conversation. So, I think that one though is, it saw its day and we're beyond that. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us in Potlandia today. John Lockwood, the OG of weed law in Florida, and my old friend. Thanks for coming to the Terracotta Room with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Dara.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is a podcast by City and State Florida, hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs LLC and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.